Alrighty, well, let's get started. My name is Patrick Urbanski. I am a horticulture student at Oregon State University, actually studying sustainable production of lots of different plants. I took plant propagation at Oregon State last year as well. So a lot of the information today I'm going to be sharing with you guys is what I learned from that class and what I've learned from propagating my own plants as well. And I'm super excited that you're all here today. We're going to be starting a little bit here, just kind of with like an overview of a lot of different things that plant propagation like encompasses. It's a pretty general term that can be applied to a lot of different stuff. So plant propagation is a term used to describe certain methods that growers and gardeners use to multiply their plants. A lot of the methods that I'm going to be showing you today will produce actually the genetically identical plant to what you're starting with. So it's not going to be, there's not really going to be any new traits that you're going to see. It's not any like crossing or anything. It's just a way to kind of clone your plants and get more of them. Let's see here. The most common method of propagation today still actually is seed propagation, which a lot of growers will still use. But that doesn't really apply as much to houseplants, so I won't really spend a lot of time on that, but it's just something interesting to know that most growers still plant all their stuff by seed, which is really interesting. I also want to kind of mention too that social media in recent years has really influenced plant propagation and what people are doing in their houses and in their houseplants and in their gardens as well. It's been affecting prices, availability of plants, availability of products. And so if something's seeming a little different than what you guys remember, what it used to be, it's been because it's just kind of, we've seen a boom kind of in that market, in that area. You'll often find a lot of people selling propagated houseplants online on like Facebook and Instagram and Etsy and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for propagated plants or you want to sell some too, I mean, a lot of people do that online locally. And so there's lots of interesting places to kind of look at that stuff. So we'll start kind of here. Also, I want to explain a little bit some of plant anatomy terms, just so that when I mention it later, you guys can kind of know what I'm talking about. So for stem cuttings, a lot of stuff on, okay, so this picture here on the left-hand side there is going to show you kind of where you're going to find a node, which is super important when propagating plants. The inner node is where you're going to make a cut when I show you that later, but that is the space in between two nodes. You can kind of see there, the node and the bud is at that end, and there's another one on the other end, and in the middle, there's not really anything that's going to grow there. So you don't want to plant anything like that, but that's where you're going to make the cut. Within the node, there's going to be buds and there's going to be places for adventitious roots to grow. A bud has a meristem in it, which is a plant site where it can produce lots of different kinds of growth, like roots and new stems and new leaves. It's kind of like stem cells for humans, if that makes sense. And so it's really important to include that usually in a cutting, because that's what allows the plant to actually grow out of that and get a new plant from that. Adventitious roots are roots that form anywhere on the stem, not normally where roots form. They're called that. It's kind of like a namesake, just because it's adventitious of the plant to be able to grow roots if it's broken or falls off or attaches to something. So that's also really important. It's speed lines. It kind of will speed up the process of propagation if you have adventitious roots in your cutting. Not every plant's going to have that, but I mean, a lot of vine tropical plants do, and it's really helpful in propagation for that. A lot of plants there, in divisions and stuff like that, you're going to look for a crown or kind of a clump of plants. A crown is just kind of where the center of the plant where new growth will form. Plants that you can divide will often have multiple crowns that you can kind of break apart, and that's how the crown is helpful in divisions. Lots of bulbs as well. There's lots of different ways to propagate bulbs. You can slice bulbs up. Some bulbs are scaly, so you can peel the scales off and plant those and get a new plant as well. The really important piece to note about bulbs is that as long as you get a piece of the basal plate in there, it'll grow a new bulb. Sometimes it's harder to do that because you can get rot and stuff like that, but a lot of the scaly bulbs like lilies, you can just pull pieces off and then plant those and you'll get new lily bulbs. So there's lots of different interesting ways to propagate. I'm going to talk about some stuff that you kind of see more in houseplants today. That's kind of our focus. But just, it's a good thing to know because some houseplants are bulbs and some, have crowns as well. So it's very interesting. I also want to mention rhizomes too. Some plants are rhizotomous is what it's called. A rhizome is an underground stem, so it will kind of creep under the ground there. That is really easy to propagate. We will just end up cutting. You can separate the rhizomes by cutting it, and they usually already have roots, so it's just kind of a separation, and then it'll kind of grow into itself as well. So that's kind of the terms that I'm going to be using today. If you guys have any questions or need any clarification as I'm talking about certain methods, feel free to raise your hand, ask me. On Zoom, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll check that regularly as well. Alrighty. Let's move on. We're going to talk about some general methods here. Like I said, seeds is a really common method for growers, not really for us. Tissue culture or micropropagation is also another really common method for growers. It produces plants exponentially, and so that's how they're able to mass produce plants for nurseries and stuff like that you would buy. But that's done in a lab setting, so it's not something that a lot of home growers attempt because it's a lot of extra work. But the most common ways you'll see, we're going to start with stem cuttings there. That's kind of a little diagram of what a stem cutting would look like if you took it. There's a couple different things you can do. So like I said, you're going to cut in the internode. I'll do a little demonstration in a second with one of those plants. And then after you cut it, you can do a couple things. You can put it in water, or you can add it to soil already or media just straight away. Water is a really common method for a lot of people. You do run the risk of rotting a lot more than you would with like perlite or something, because there's a lot more air movement in perlite. The water ideally should be changed weekly because it does kind of get dirty and it grows algae, so you got to look out for that. If it's not weekly, but you're not seeing any algae growth or sticky stuff in there, you should be okay. But it's good to refresh the water because they need the extra oxygen to grow roots. Otherwise, it becomes kind of anoxic in the water. After the roots have developed, it's going to take anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months. You can then plant it into soil or your preferred potting media. And you're going to have to keep it wet a little bit longer because it's been in water for so long and that's what it's used to. So you're going to have to keep the soil moist, at least for the first week, and kind of slowly adjust it to where, if it was like a snake plant, until it's drying out a lot more. But the roots are going to be a lot more sensitive than they would if you grow them in soil. A good tip I have to share with you guys about water propagation too, if you add an air stone, like from a fish tank, like a bubbler, into your water propagations, it makes the roots grow a lot faster and a lot healthier because it keeps the water aerated, which prevents the anoxic environment, which can also prevent rot, which is really nice. It's not necessary for a lot of plants, but I mean, it does help plants grow pretty crazy roots if you have an aerator in there. Talking about soil or media, if you take a stem cutting and you put it straight into soil or into another type of media, there's a couple different things to consider. Putting it into soil and keeping the soil moist is going to prevent it's going to make it an easier transition process because you're not going to have to switch it to soil later. But it does kind of create an environment where rot is a lot more likely because it's so tight in there and wet, and there's microbes in a lot of soil. So there's a couple different things we can do to avoid that. Seed starting mix that we sell, it's used for starting seeds like it says, but it's also sterilized. So any spores or bacteria that would have been in normal potting soil have been killed. So that's really helpful in preventing rot. You can also use a higher quality potting soil, like our Blue Ribbon blend that we sell here. It's a higher quality, so it's going to have less stuff in it. So that can also help prevent rot as well. Let's see here if I have anything else. I would say also keeping the soil or media evenly moist until you start seeing roots and the plant has established itself is going to be important, because if it dries out, it's going to kill any new roots that are forming. My personal method that I use a lot of moss for tropical plants and perlite, just straight perlite or just straight moss in there. If you keep that moist, the perlite's great because it acts like soil, so the roots grow into it. They feel they're toughened up already because they act like they're growing in a harder media, but it's really airy and it keeps moisture really well. Moss, similar, it's a little bit softer, but it stays wet for a lot longer. And the sphagnum moss block that we have over there, it's New Zealand sphagnum moss. It's great because it doesn't decay very fast. It's long fibered, and it's really fluffy, so it holds a lot of moss, and it's kind of great for keeping humidity up as well and propagating a lot of houseplants. You can also use pumice, very similar to perlite. It's a little heavier, but that's another thing you can use. And we also have those clay pebbles, also called like leca. That works for stuff as well. I would be careful with leca using smaller plants or plants with smaller roots, just because they're big clay, like they're expanded clay pebbles is what they are, and they're like this big, so it can be difficult for little roots to kind of grow in there, and it's a little bit more difficult to keep that moist. But if you have a high humidity environment, it might be a little bit more helpful than say moss would or something, because moss will keep the humidity up a lot. I'm going to demonstrate a stem cutting here for you guys. I'm going to bring it over here, and I'll show you guys, and then I'll show the Zoom people as well. So here we have a philodendron, a trailing philodendron, heartweed. So you can see I just took this cutting. There's a couple different nodes on this plant, 3 different nodes right here with the adventitious roots. There's a couple different things. I'm just going to go right here and cut in the inner node. Go like that. And this is your stem cutting right here. It's got the roots, it's got a bud right here as well. That you would just stick straight into water or moss or soil or whatever you guys want to do. I'm going to show the Zoom people right now as well. We're going to take our philodendron here. It's got a node right here with some adventitious roots growing. We're just going to take a snip, and this is what you would put in your media. This is a top cutting. You're going to get new growth faster from a top cutting because it's already got new growth coming, but it won't prevent it. Like this is still definitely going to grow. It's going to shoot a new growth out of here. It just is going to take a little bit longer, most likely, because it's got to start from scratch, basically.
So is it going to root from the cuttings and that other node?
Yeah, so like it'll root here and then it'll shoot out new growth.
But it won't root from where you cut.
No. Yeah, the inner nodes, the space in between the nodes, you like if I were to go like this and just have a piece of the inner node like this, it's not going to grow. You need that bud because it can develop and differentiate into different cell types. Yeah.
You mentioned top cut. Can I come across other terms like butt cut?
Yes.
Like mid?
Yes. So this would be considered a mid cut because was cut from the middle of the stem. It's got 2 inner node spaces on both sides and a bud in the middle. Butt cuts is a term coined by a lot of houseplant growers. It's used on a lot of like anthuriums and stuff like that. The base, so anthuriums grow like on a trunk kind of. You can't really see it normally because it's under the soil, but they've got like a trunk. A butt cut would be going below the soil, trimming the bottom off, and then you have kind of some roots and then like the stump with no leaves on it. And there's buds generally on the stem. So you'd plant that and then it would grow new growth out of the trunk kind of. Those usually take longer than any other cuttings, even though they already have roots established. They have to start, they've been under the soil for a long time, so they have to start completely from scratch. There's no chlorophyll or anything. So it's got to kind of take up energy and hold it, and then it's going to use it to leaf out.
So someone's like selling the base of the plant.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it'll have leaves. Sometimes it'll have like 1 or 2 leaves, okay. But it's literally like it's just the bottom of the plant is what that's known as. I also want to mention too, we've got rooting hormone. A lot of people are, for it or against it. There's a couple different things I want to mention. So a lot of people that use rooting hormone have really good success. Most growers that do stem cuttings, like for wholesale growing, use rooting hormone because it's the fastest way to get new roots. Let's see here. Let's go back. So rooting hormone it's like I said, it's gonna be the fastest way to get new roots. I don't always use it because I just don't have it always with me. But if you want, roots to grow faster and stronger, rooting hormone is a great way to do it. We have specifically houseplant rooting hormone that we sell that's made for that, so you can get it in little quantities. Otherwise, you can't find it really. It's wholesalers buy like concentrate jugs that they have to mix up because they do so much propagation. But we sell it in a powder and in a liquid. The powder, you would just take the cutting, dip the bottom in, and then make sure when you plant it, it doesn't really work well with water too. I want to mention that when you use rooting hormone, it doesn't really grow well with water. It makes the water grow faster, but it works good in soil and other media. So if you're using the powder, dip it in there, make sure you make a hole for the plant and then stick it in there and cover the soil back up, because if you just shove it in there, the powder just gets rubbed off and then it doesn't do anything. So make sure that when you use the powder, that's how you do it. Same thing with the liquid, but the liquid, again, you just dip in there and it'll be wet and then you would just plant it. It's really your preference. I've used the powder before and a lot of people really like it. It's not my favorite because it's really dusty and it gets kind of messy if you're not careful. But I have not tried the liquid personally. I've tried the liquid in a larger environment and I liked it. It seemed to work really well. But I've not tried that specific product. So, I mean, I would just go based on what you guys are comfortable with. And we can talk about that more if you guys have any questions about rooting hormone. But that'll work for a lot of different plants, for a lot of different cuttings as well. Leaf cuttings, stem cuttings, divisions, it can help. So that's another good thing if you guys want, if you're trying to streamline your propagation, rooting hormone is really helpful. I also want to say plants that do really well from stem cuttings, philodendron, spider plants, monsteras, nepenthes, pitcher plants like tropical pitcher plants, ficus, and a lot more plants you can do from stem cuttings as well. Kind of depends on what you're looking at, but we'll talk about some other stuff too. The next thing I'm going to talk about is leaf cuttings here. I couldn't find a good diagram of a leaf cutting, so I just showed an African violet because they're great. They're known for leaf cuttings. Leaf cutting involves taking the leaf off of a plant and either scarifying it or like scraping it a little bit, or just putting it into your media or your water, and letting it grow roots. The roots will pop out of the base of the stem or the leaf, and then it'll grow plantlets that you can then plant once it's got a root system and it'll kind of grow out. I'll show you an example with a begonia and an African violet in a minute on how to do that, because it's a different process for a lot of different plants. So got someone coming in. Come on in. Yeah, I'll give you this too. All right. So for a begonia stem cutting, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can take the stem and the leaf, or just the leaf. If you take, for both of them, honestly, I would take the leaf, flip it over. There's going to be veins on the bottom of that leaf there that you can see running through the plant. Take a little knife or scissors or like a little blade, just scrape it a little bit. That's going to help if you use rooting hormone, it's going to help with the rooting hormone to get in there. It's also just going to promote new growth because it's going to want to kind of repair the wound that you did, but at the same time, it's going to grow roots. So that kind of triggers the plant to grow by giving that little scrape. Let's see. I would probably stay away with water with begonias. They rot pretty easily, so it's better. What I did when I did plant propagation, like the class, we did begonias, we took them, we scarified them, we put them in a Ziploc pretty much, and with perlite on top and on the bottom, like covered, and it kept the humidity nice in there, and it grew roots after a couple of weeks out of the bottom, and then it grew plantlets as well that you can separate off later. So that's what I would do with begonias. I'll kind of show you what I mean in a second with that. African violets, I've done a couple different things with African violets, and the most successful way that I've experienced is taking the leaf and the stem from near the base of the plant, putting the stem in water, letting that grow roots. After a couple of weeks, you'll see some plantlets starting to sprout at the bottom, and then transplant it into an African violet potting mix. I didn't think the African violet potting mix was special. It is, to come to find out. I've tried planting them in normal potting soil, and it's too heavy and thick actually for the roots because they have really fine roots. So the African violet potting soil is used, and it's a lot finer, so the roots can actually grow in it. But if you propagate something with fresh roots and then you put it in a really heavy potting soil, the roots are just not going to be able to survive in that environment. So make sure you plant it into African violet potting mix after you get the roots on there. And then what normally happens with African violets, they produce a bunch of plantlets around the stem. So you're going to have to go in again at some point and divide them out, because otherwise you'll just have a clump, which is fine. But it can cause competition issues later, and they can kind of crowd each other, which isn't great, and you won't have the healthiest plant. So once it's established itself, in a little pot, you can kind of unpot it, take a couple out, and separate them out again. So you usually get more than one plant from that. Let's see here. Snake plants are also known for leaf cuttings, which is kind of funny because you wouldn't think of snake plants having like leaves normally. That's that thing kind of right over there. What you would do is you chop that whole blade down, and then you can chop it up into pieces, actually.
Down to the soil?
Yeah, down to the soil or just above the soil. Chop that up into pieces, and then put the pieces the same orientation they were growing. Don't flip it upside down, if that makes sense. Yeah, keep it in the same orientation, either in soil or in a media. You can do it in water. I've done it in water before.
You can.
Yes, you can. But again, make sure you change the water or have an air stone just so that there's aeration in there, because they are prone to rot.
Just literally chop it
Yeah,
up in like 2-inch.
Yeah.
layers.
Yeah, I'll show you I can do an example of a small leaf, and I'll show you what I mean.
Okay.
They take a while to root, so just be ready for that. They're slow, but they will, as long as they're staying green, they're fine. They'll sprout roots out just straight out the bottom of the stem, and then they'll produce little plantlets at the bottom as well.
Is it 50-50?
It's not 50-50. There's
Okay.
things that you can do to kind of, help that. Like I said, rooting hormone helps, changing the water helps, having a aerated environment, so like air stone or using perlite or moss or something else other than water helps. You're not gonna have
The
a,
baggy thing?
what?
Could you do the baggy
You
thing?
could. I haven't tried it. It might be a little too much humidity,
Okay.
because they don't want to be super, yeah, they don't want to be super humid. So I would be careful with that. And like I said, it's
It'll rot.
you probably won't have 100% success with every cutting that you take, but I mean, there's things that you can do that we've talked about that are gonna put them in a better position than they were if you didn't do them. So that's kind of what that. I'll show you some examples now for the begonias and the African here. So I'm just gonna make a slice on the African violet here, right towards the base of the plant. It's gonna look like this, just the leaf and the stem. And then I'll kind of show you guys over here as well. So just the leaf and the stem, put that in water, you can dip it in rooting hormone and put it in African violet soil, and it'll grow roots at the bottom. And if it rots a little bit, at the bottom, you can always recut it and try again. Just make sure when you do that, there's no rot actually in where you're cutting. It's gonna be fresh tissue. So that's how you do African violets. It'll grow little plantlets at the bottom there, and then you can plant it up. For begonias, I'll take a smaller, older leaf in here so it's not detrimental. I just grabbed the stem here. I'll show you the backside of the leaf here. We're gonna scarify the veins on here with this. We're just gonna kind of scrape it like that. You can kind of see that it's got veins right in here on the leaf, and you're just gonna kind of cut it with the scissors or with your knife. It's gonna be hard with fingers. I would use like something else a little bit smaller and just kind of scrape just a little bit. You don't want to cut a hole in the plant, but just
Take the skin off.
wound it a little, yeah. And then you're gonna put that on the soil or in your baggie or whatever you're gonna propagate this with, and it'll grow roots at the bottom of the leaf. Where you kind of scraped, that's where it should be growing roots. Yeah.
Wait, what other plants can you do that with?
Leaf cuttings. Well, for begonias, they're kind of special. I wouldn't scarify a lot of different leaf cuttings. It just works better for begonias specifically, but you can do snake plants too. I'll do a little example of that, of what I mean, because it's a little confusing and it sounds a little weird.
It sounds like it's not gonna work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Snake plants also are great candidates for division, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So
Oh, just unpot and kind of just pull them apart.
yeah, so this is where I made the cut. I just left a little bit above the soil there because I don't need the whole thing. It looks like this. We're gonna literally chop it up like this, and you're gonna keep your pieces and you're gonna plant it in there. I dropped one, I lost one. You can dip it in rooting hormone from the
I
bottom.
don't know which.
Yeah,
I know, it's hard to tell. It is hard to tell. So I would recommend doing it on a table and just slicing it. Yeah, I'm just trying to show you guys an example, but this one I know is up, right? And so we'll put this in our rooting hormone and then we'll plant it in the soil there, and it'll grow roots and little plantlets at the bottom, and it'll kind of shoot up new blades. They won't be big, they'll start small. It's got to work its way back up. But that's how you would propagate a snake plant. So
All right, I'll try. If it doesn't work, I'm coming back.
okay.
Ooh.
I've done them in water and straight into soil before, and they've both worked. So straight into soil is a little discouraging sometimes because you can't see the root growth. But usually it is happening, unless you see rot, and then it's not happening. But in water, it's nice if you want to watch it. You can do root growth. You can do it in water, but if you are just looking for easy, I would put it in soil or media. You won't be able to see the roots as well, but if you can tug on it a little, if it's stuck in there, yeah, don't do too hard though. You don't want to break the roots off. So it's gonna take like a while for snake plants to root. They're slow, like a couple of weeks. Yeah. So that's, I think, all I have to say about leaf cuttings. I don't know if I've got anything else. There's a couple different plants you can do this with. These are the ones, like most common house plants that you do leaf cutting with. It won't work with like a philodendron or anything because there's no node, right? This has buds like and meristems in it, whereas this has only a meristem at the node, so that's why it wouldn't work for a philodendron if you put a leaf in. So you just got to kind of consider that. A lot of plants that grow in crowns or in rosettes are good with leaf cuttings, if that makes sense. This is a vine, so it's not that way, but this has got, you know, divisions of African violet and begonias, or African violets are crowns and begonias are rhizotomous, actually. So you can also unpot a begonia and divide it, and there's rhizomes in there that you can chop up when they're bigger. It's harder when they're small because the rhizomes are a lot smaller, but when they get bigger, you can definitely go in there and divide it up. We're going to talk about divisions next, so I'll mention that in a little bit more detail in a second. Again, there wasn't really a good diagram for divisions, so I put a ZZ plant up there because they're great for divisions. Divisions involve clumping plants or plants with multiple growth points coming out of the soil that can be separated at the roots or at the rhizome or at the bulb. They can be directly repotted into soil if they already have roots, which is great. But they might need a little bit more time in some kind of media if there's, not really many roots, or if you break a lot off, and just let them kind of develop a stronger root system. Also, be careful if you make a big cut, you don't want to, put it in wet soil right away because it can cause a rot in the original plant under the soil, if that makes sense.
That actually happened when I tried to hydroponic to grow on the sun.
Yeah, it can get, that happens with a little bit excess moisture. So I would kind of wait to kind of get back on your regular watering schedule, or you can let it sit out for a day, let it dry a little bit, especially
just let it sit out and dry.
Let it callus over. Yeah. Yeah, I would just letting it dry is a great way to prevent. If you're doing a big cutting or like a big stem cutting or a big division cutting, it's good to let it dry out for at least a day before you put it back into soil or into water or something. A lot of these little things, it's not a big deal. It also, and they're little, so they don't have as much storage either. And so this is actually going to allow them to take up water while the roots are growing. So before it doesn't have roots, so it'll keep it hydrated. But if you're cutting like a big monstera, the rot's going to have way more chances to get in. So I would either dry it out, let it dry out a little bit. Some people will put like hot wax or super glue on the end to kind of close it up if it's a really big wound. But if it's the small wounds, it's not really as big of a concern. Okay, let's see. Plants that work well for divisions include peace lilies, any pots that have lots of plants in them, like overplanted pots, ZZ plants, snake plants. You would just unpot them, like I said, kind of work them apart. Sometimes if you get them from a grower, they'll put actually a couple cuttings in a pot and they'll already be separated. So if you unpot it, and you can kind of just try and work it apart, and there generally will be already separate plants in one pot. So try your best if you're doing a division to keep some roots for that plant. It's going to make it a lot easier for you and the plant to get going. But I don't think I've got much else to say really about divisions. They're pretty straightforward. They're not super difficult. ZZ plants are bulbs, so you're just going to work apart the bulbs kind of in there. That plant, like the philodendron that we took a cutting of, can actually probably be divided because, like I said, there's probably 4 or 5 individual plants in that pot. They just stick cuttings in and then let them fill out. That's how they get really full plants. So you can divide something like that as well. The next method I'm going to talk about isn't as common or as used, but it can be really helpful for a lot of different plants that might be you're scared to cut right away. It's called air layering. That is what the finished product looks like before you would cut it off the plant. So air layering involves putting media like soil or moss around the stem, around a node, and then getting it wet, and then wrapping it up with foil or plastic and keeping it closed, for a couple of weeks. The plant will actually shoot roots out of the stem into the media, and then you would just go in kind of right below the cutting here and just cut it off, and then you would take that and plant it. So it already has got a little mini root system going, and you would just put it in there. It only works with certain plants. It works good with philodendron, monstera, and ficus. So if you're wanting to propagate ficus, it's a little less scary than chopping it and putting it in water and hoping that it grows roots, because this is a little bit more controlled. It's in more of a controlled environment.
I just noticed 2 days ago, just driving by 29th,
Mhm.
and near the co-op, there's a tree or something that has a whole bunch of those things, and I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, so that's what they a lot of growers will use that to get stem cuttings as well, on like softwood trees, and on new growth or hardwood trees. But it works great for shrubby houseplants. So that's really fun, and it's you know, it doesn't always work fast, but it's more of a surefire way to kind of prevent your plant from rotting or losing it in water or something like that. And it gives your plant a head start too, because you're not losing any. It's still getting energy from the main plant while growing roots. So once you separate it, it'll still be, it's got all that energy still growing. It's not losing energy over time and then having to build it back up once it grows roots. So that's an interesting method for sure.
Do you scar it before you?
Not generally, no.
Just put it around?
Yeah, you can scar some like hardwood stuff, I think. But for ficus and stuff like that, ficus tend to grow aerial roots even in the wild. They send out runners and they try and attach to stuff. So I mean, for ficus, they'll just send out new roots. And for monstera and philodendron, if you air layered this, if you pretend this is still on the plant, wrap it around right here, and it would these roots would sprout out, and then you could cut it. So yeah, air layering is interesting. I've not tried air layering myself. I've meant to try it. I know you can buy little plastic balls that actually will snap together around a stem with a hole in the middle so that it keeps it in there, and you would just fill that up with moss and then snap it around. So that's something that you can try. I think I've seen those on like Amazon or something. But I've never tried that myself, but it looks a lot more convenient than trying to wrap like saran wrap around it. But I mean, that's what you would do. Wrap saran wrap.
Plastic bag.
I think that's a Ziploc, yeah, that they've like cut a hole in the bottom and in the top, and then they've like rubber banded it together. Yeah. So, or like a small like sandwich bag or something.
And you keep it moist.
Yeah. I would wet it before, and ideally if you close it tight enough, it should keep the moisture in there. Yeah. But if you have to just open it up and put a little water, you just get a spray bottle and kind of spray it in there so it stays moist. Because you don't want it to be full of water, you just want it to be lightly moist so that it is good environment for root growth. Okay, I think that I've covered all the methods that I'm going to talk about today for propagation overall. We're going to talk about the conditions of what the cuttings and the propagations that you take should be in to promote root growth next.
Oh, wait, I'm curious, do epiphytes have any special requirements for propagation?
Epiphytes being like orchids or just any like ferns or okay.
Wait, are Christmas cacti epiphytes?
I don't know if they're epiphytes. They might be both. They could be terrestrial and epiphytic. I'm not quite sure. Christmas cactus you would just take a stem cutting, and it's going to be the same process. I've rooted Christmas cactus in soil before and in water. They're usually willing to root. They're pretty easy to propagate. So just kind of take that at the bottom of one of the leaves there.
Like is there specific media you can use for that?
I would just use seed starting mix or potting, like a nice potting soil.
No, I'm not calling epiphytes in general.
Depends on the plant, I would say, because orchids you're not going to want to put in potting soil. It depends on how the plants, on what they grow in originally. You're going to want to create kind of a good environment for the roots, but also keep it similar to what they're used to growing in. So for epiphytes, it's going to vary because they like a lot of airflow. Epiphytes usually work good in perlite because it's super airy, and they normally grow on trees. That's what epiphytic means. They grow on trees, so perlite is great because it keeps moisture, but it's also really airy. So I would say probably perlite, just for a general epiphyte, stuff like that. Something that's going to keep the airflow going. Someone's in our waiting room. All right. Let's move on here to conditions. So a couple different things. That's my little mini propagation greenhouse I have at home. I'm using to-go containers right now to keep the humidity up. So you can see there's moss in the bottom, and I've covered those nodes with moss, and so they're going to root out into the moss, and it also keeps the humidity up at the same time. So that's good for little mini propagations. I used to have a greenhouse before I came here for school, and I would just use something like that tray right there with those covers. I had misters in my greenhouse, so it kept it a little bit more humid for them too. But specifically, we'll talk about lighting first. After taking cuttings or divisions, for the first couple days, they don't really need a lot of light. They're going to be recovering because you've just separated it from its plant, from the mother plant is what it's called. But then, it should, for optimum root growth, you should put it in a bright, well-lit location. These new baby plants are not going to be acclimated to full sun, so you don't want to put it right under a grow light or in full sun. But these grow lights aren't super bright in that little greenhouse thing right there. It just keeps the area well lit, and that's going to be the best optimum root growth lighting conditions as well. For temperature, there's a couple different things. For houseplants, it's good to keep them warm. It's warmer generally is going to do best for root growth. I would say 60 to 75 degrees. You don't want to go below 60 or above 75. Above 75 can stress them out. They're going to go into conserving water mode, which they already don't have a lot of because it's just a piece of a plant. So keeping it below that is ideal. If it's cold in your house, or if you want the roots to grow faster, bottom heat is a great way to keep the plants healthy and happy. That's kind of what that picture on the right is showing. In large scale greenhouses, they run pipes under benches and on the floor that have steam in them, or they heat up in some way. There's a heating element in it. Yeah, and it keeps the roots warmer, and it encourages root growth. We sell heat mats. They're usually called seedling heat mats. They work really well. Be careful in the summer though. You don't want to be using a heat mat in the summer because it can get too hot in there. But especially in the wintertime, it's a great way to keep propagations going. Yeah, heat mats are great for that kind of thing. They also can keep other houseplants warmer. If you have got a cold area in your house, you can put them under that. And they're meant specifically for plants, so it's not going to get too hot if it's cold outside. Humidity is a big thing for a lot of houseplants. You don't really want excess humidity with things like snake plants or succulents because it's going to be it's going to encourage rot, and they're already arid plants.
I already know about that problem because I have some cycles that I have.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the humidity balance.
Yeah, you don't want to go too hard on the arid plants because they'll rot a lot easier than like a philodendron would. But for philodendrons, you want to keep them in a little bit higher humidity than you normally would in your house, because they, like I said, it's just a little baby piece, and this is all they have. There's no nutrients coming in because they don't have roots yet. And they're not attached to the plant anymore. So higher humidity is good because it's going to keep it from desiccating or drying out. It's also going to promote optimum root growth because roots, if they'll start to grow if they're in a moist condition, but then it dries out and those roots are just this big and they just die. So keeping them moist and a little bit more humid area is going to be great, especially in the first couple of weeks before they have roots. You can kind of dial it back once they're getting roots, because then you can water it, right? And it's going to absorb the water and be hydrated.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I have a Cuban oregano, but I don't know how to propagate it.
I would say probably stem cuttings would be best for Cuban oregano because it's really fuzzy, and they're also from arid environments. So you don't want to go not too humid because it can cause rot and mildew on the leaves.
Like water.
You could do water. I would try soil. That might work. Just straight potting soil. Have you done rooting hormone with it?
No.
Okay, I would try that. I feel you could try water too. You could do a couple experiments. Like I said, it's gonna be different for every plant, and you're all gonna have your own preferences of certain methods and stuff.
Not creating stuff, it's like a pit, like they're
That's probably a light issue. Here in Oregon too, I forgot to mention this. Grow lights for propagations can be really helpful in the wintertime. A lot of plants just kind of give up in the winter. They take a break. They're like, nope, I can't do it. There's not enough light. I don't have enough sugars in my system to grow. So now it's got to restart everything, right? So having a grow light or some sort of other light source is going to be very helpful. Yeah, going back to humidity, like I said, once you have some roots, humidity can be decreased because you can water it and it'll actually take up the water because the water potential is the issue. So plants respire, right? They release water, and if it's dry, it's going to go from areas of high concentration to low concentration. So the water is going to come out of the plant as it respires, and it's going to dry out. If you're in higher humidity, the humidity is going to be, there's 100% humidity inside the plant. It's full of water. If it's going to be, 80% on the outside, it's going to lose water a lot slower than it would if it was just in your house, if that makes sense. So that's also why you want to do it. It's going to keep the water in the plant and not from respiring. Let's see if I have anything else in here. Oh yeah, when you root in water, it's not really as big of an issue, because the stem is in water and it can suck it up like a flower stem, like cut flowers would, from the stem until it grows roots. But when you're rooting in media, higher humidities, I would say, is good to have. And like I said, it doesn't even, like, you can get a humidifier. That's from our store out there. We have that humidifier out there for some of our more touchy houseplants. But like, you don't have to get a humidifier. You can just get to-go containers from your local restaurant. Like, it doesn't, like, it just depends. Like, those are, my roommate goes and she gets soup all the time, and I just take her to-go containers and I put plants in it. So there you can see in there, this is the philodendron right here. So there's philodendron cuttings in there right now, and they'll root just fine. So that's something that you can do for sure. I want to talk about next. I don't know if I have a slide for this. We'll see. No, I don't. It's okay. We'll stay on this one. Transitioning plants from like water to soil is really important. Like I said, plants that are rooted in soil should be kept moist until they have grown a good root system. And then you can kind of, if it's a snake plant, like I said, you can kind of back off, and, you know, because snake plants only get water every couple of weeks. So back off, you know, once it grows roots and it's growing, it's got new growth, you know, you can let it dry out in between waterings and kind of slowly decrease it until it's what you would keep a normal snake plant at over a period of a couple of weeks is what I would say. Plants that are rooted in water have very sensitive roots. They have not been, they're not pushing, they're not digging through soil, they're not ever drying out anywhere. So they're kind of like really delicate and really sensitive. So as you put it into soil, you want to put it in, you know, in a good soil, like a high quality potting soil. And like a same thing with if you're already rooted in soil, where you would keep it moist, like it was still in water, and then slowly reduce it as it is establishing itself in a soil environment. Usually it's not, it's not as complicated as I'm making it sound. Like I have one of those really expensive, one of those monsters actually on there. And my friend gave me like the top piece of it, and I let it dry out because it was a bigger cutting. I put it in water. It grew, you know, a pretty good root system, because I didn't want to just put it in with a couple roots. You want to make sure it's got a good substantial amount of roots. And I put it in the soil, and I kept it moist for like the first week and a half, and then I let it dry out once, and then now I only water it when it needs it. So it's just a slow transition process for it. You're just kind of bringing it out into the real world, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, ask about that. I've had a lot of trouble in this period, usually with fuchsias, where they have a really great root collection that they've made in water, and then putting them into any kind of soil. The stem just kind of collapses in on itself and dries up, and separates the top stuff from the root. So
if the bottom of the stem is rotting or drying up, that could be a fungus issue. So what you could do is pre-treat the stem before you put it in soil with a fungicide, or use seed starting mix to start, because seed starting mix is sterilized. So there's nothing in there that's going to infect the plant. And then after it grows roots in the seed starting mix and that callus is over, then put it into potting soil. Yeah. If it's dampening off, I think I brought a little bag of, that black bag on that table is seedling mix. So you can buy like a small starter bag of it. You don't need to buy a whole lot of it, which is great. So that and that's another step in like the transition into letting it out in the real world. Because I mean, a lot of our houseplants don't really need that. I've never really experienced any issues like that with houseplants, but if saying fuchsias are, it sounds like a damping off issue. So I would put it in the sterile mixture first, and then once it grows roots in that, repotting it into normal potting soil. Yeah. Okay. I'll move on now to kind of our tools, our soils, and all that kind of stuff that you can use. I'll just go in a little bit more depth about it. Let's see here. So perlite and pumice, like I said, it's great for epiphytes. It's good for Christmas cactus, philodendron, you know, any runners on philodendrons or other aeroids and stuff like that. It kind of helps the roots get a little bit more adjusted to growing in something before you put it in soil, and it stays moist really well. And it's great because it's got a lot of surface area. So if you have it in a little enclosed environment, it'll keep the humidity up for you too. So as long as it's like enclosed. So that works great. Moss, like I said, I use it a lot in that last slide for a lot of my philodendrons and stuff like that, because it's like they're growing on a tree with wet moss. And so it kind of,
curious.
Yeah.
Do you use living moss? You
can. I would be careful though, because living moss tends to come with bugs, fungus, other stuff.
No, I meant like the pre-packed living moss stuff, like you can get at special storage in nurseries.
They still can sometimes have stuff in it because they can't treat it.
I meant like a mature plant.
You could, yeah, for sure. If it's mature, I'd be, that's fine.
Yeah.
The sphagnum moss that we have over there is treated, it's sterilized, so that you won't have issues generally with outside pathogens coming in. You just might have a little bit of a moisture issue or airflow issue, which can cause rot. So that's what you'd be worried about with moss, I would say. But it works great. A lot of tropical vines root very well and very fast in moss. Soil causes less of a transition shock later, but rotting risk is much higher because of the less airflow and possible pathogens in it. Seed starting mix is a good option as well because it's sterilized, like I said. But you would have to probably transition it into something else later because seed starting mix doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. It's meant just for germination and growing roots, and then it's not going to maintain the plant's health overall for a long period of time. Rooting hormone, very helpful. It's going to boost your success rate no matter what. Like I said, we have powder and we've got the liquid. The liquid is probably going to be easier because all you have to do is literally just dip it in and then you leave it. The powder can fall off and get dusty, but a lot of people like the powder. We sell a lot of the powder here and it works really well for a lot of people. So let's see here. Heat mat, like I said, it's used commercially for bottom heat is used commercially to help plants establish faster. So it's a very proven method to help your roots grow really well. It's not necessary, but it's going to help. It's going to speed the process along, which is also good because I mean, the faster that you can get roots on a plant, the better it's going to look, and the faster it's going to establish and begin to grow. So that's something to consider as well. Grow lights, are they good here in the wintertime? Or if you've got a dark spot in your house that you aren't doing anything with, it's a good place you can set up a little prop station, get a tray, get a cloche or something, a little mini greenhouse like that last picture. Set it up and you have grow lights in there and you can put all your propagations in there. And pruners and scissors are a very important piece of this process here. You're going to want to make sure you have sharp scissors because if you've got weak scissors, it's going to cause a lot more damage in there. It's not going to callus over as quickly as it would if it was a clean cut. Also, in between plants that you're cutting, you should probably sterilize your scissors with either like a little rubbing alcohol or a flame or both. Just because if one plant has a fungus or something, you don't want to transfer it over to the other plant because it'll get left on here, and that can be an issue as well.
It's still possible to save it.
It is. I would probably try and clean off as much of the mold or rotted area as
It
possible.
looks like it's growing under like the papery stuff on.
Yeah, I peel the papery stuff off and see how deep it is. If the whole bulb was rotted through, it's probably not salvageable. But you can treat it with a fungicide if it's only a little bit, and try and scrape off.
Always.
Yeah, you could do that. I would be careful though, because alcohol can kill the plant. Fungicides are plant safe. So alcohol is good for sterilizing tools, but not necessarily plants. What else do I have over there to talk about? We've got those little mini pots. So once you get it out of water, a small area, we sell little plastic 4-inch pots that you can put stuff in. We've got that big tray. If you were looking to do lots of propagations, you can, fill that tray up with media, and do it like that. Perlite and pumice are over there. Our seed starting mix is over there. Our high quality potting soil is that blue ribbon blend that we've got. Leca is another form of hydroponic media that works good for propagating plants with bigger, thicker roots. Don't forget to label stuff. If you have because here's the thing, guys, if you get a cutting, there's no leaf on it, because that happens to me. You can still root stuff as long as there's a node, right? It doesn't have to have a leaf. You put a node in one of those containers, you open it up and I'm like, I don't even know what's in here. It's just a stem. I'm waiting for it to root. So if you don't forget, labeling is really helpful. We sell plastic and wood ones and metal ones. You can just write on there with a Sharpie or a pencil. Pro tip, if you've got plastic labels, use a pencil. It doesn't rub off like Sharpie does. Sharpie will rub off a plastic label, but pencils don't. So we've got a grow light set over there too, and a heat mat. And then we also have a heat mat thermostat. So if you want to really control your environment, the thermostat can be helpful with that. But I don't think I have anything else to share with you guys. The people on Zoom, thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat. I'll stick around, and anyone here can ask me questions as well. And if not, feel free to head into the store and I'll be in there in a couple minutes as well. So thank you.
Yeah.